Hello and welcome to the final part 5 of this 234/4 Spähwagen build. Now, as you can see, this is where we left off. So we did all the paint work, we did some airbrush weathering as well. So in this part, what we're going to be concentrating on is the airy stick side of weathering and also some detailed paintwork. And before I crack on, I just want to say I hate rubber tyres. But either way, what I've done, I've already started the weathering on one of the sides, as you usually do, and I've started off with the mud, which is the first layer which you need to concentrate on, and then you can work on subsequent layers throughout. So what I've used is a Vallejo, or Vallejo, depending on what you want to say. I've not used AK Interactive 1, and also what I've used is the Woodland Scenics grass just there. So as I mentioned earlier, I used the Vallejo mud, and it is water based, so obviously you thin with water. You can thin it as little or as much as you want, and depending on how you do thin it, the thinner it is, obviously it's going to dry a lot quicker, and the thicker it's going to take a lot longer. Now I do it in stages. I don't do a one hit, to be honest with you, because I wasn't quite sure how much mud I wanted on there, so I'll build it up in layers. Obviously you can do whatever you want, you can build it up in layers or put as much as you want on and do it in one hit. But either way, I'm not going to really overemphasize me just putting mud into here. Obviously, it's going to go into the nuts and crannies, and I'm putting it down in the fenders and this, that, and the other. But one thing I do show you later on is a way of, while it's still wet, is manoeuvring it and prodding it around. So anyway, at this point, I'm going to leave you with me doing this. I'll see you on the other side. So once the mud is on there, and for me that was the first application of mud, I can use a fresh brush, moisten with some water, and I can just, and to be honest with you, I put too much water in there, and I can reposition the mud wherever I don't want it and wherever I do want more of it. Because the previous application of mud, I was using a yard brush and I didn't feel like I had too much control. So this is why I'm doing this step, and I've blobbed a bit on the side, you knob. But either way, what I'm thinking of is the reality of the vehicle, where it was operating, how it was operating, and it was really going through fields, it was on roads, it wasn't really on World War I trench systems, so this is why I'm not putting too much mud on there. But the other thing is, I don't want to overcoat the detail, I don't want to lose that very nice detail, so I'm just cleaning down the brush as well. So as you saw there, I'm just drying the brush down as well so that I can reposition the mud a bit more. And also what I do is I use cotton buds just to take the excess off. Now I don't need to really overemphasize me just manoeuvring the mud and position it. You can do whatever you want to. So I'm going to leave you with me doing this, and I'll see you again in a bit. Right, after that application of layers of mud, now it's time to do the grass. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm using the Woodland Scenics grass only because I've had that in my stash for years, and I thought, you know what, I might as well use that. Also what I'm using, as you can see here, is the Tamiya photo etch scissors just to cut the strands to different lengths. Now you don't have to use Woodland Scenics grass, you can use whatever you want. To be honest with you, I've heard of people actually using household brushes, and if the bristles are thin enough, especially for the scale that you need, then why not? But just be wary that if they are different colours, like funky colours like pink, purple, red, whatever, you're going to have to paint them green, or you can use whatever hue of green you want. Now also, I like putting these strands on afterwards because I don't like putting it in with the mix of the mud. Only reason being is because you kind of lose all those nice greens and this, that and the other. Now I use a slightly moist brush just to reposition these strands of grass into the mud so that it just anchors it in. I don't want to get the whole strand in there because I want to show a bit of green and this and yellow all the way throughout. Again, I don't need to overemphasize this part of the build or the weathering process. So I'm going to leave you with me. I hope you enjoy this bit, and I'll see you again in a tad. And finally, while that mud is drying, we can get onto some brush painting using Vallejo, light grey and black. I use some white in there as well just to lighten certain areas up. And I've painted one side of the tools as usual, and now I've got to paint the other side as well. So also what I paint is areas which is going to be later wood. But either way, so moving on to the actual painting itself. Now, as you know, I've glued the tools down. Now on the bottom side, which is connected to the actual surface, if you're not going to see it, then what's the point of painting it anyway? Now, I don't see the point in that. I took this to a show and nobody noticed that I didn't paint the underneath because you can't see anyway. So I don't need to overemphasize this step. It is just painting. Just make sure that your paint is not too thin and not too thick. The reason being is because if it is close to the surface, if it's too thin, then it's going to flood into the original paint that you painted previously. But either way, I'm going to leave you with me doing this, and I'll see you in a bit. I must admit, actually painting wood grain for me is like painting skin tone on figures. I don't like doing it very much, but either way, I must do it, and I don't think it looks too bad. Now, what I've used is the Volume 1 and 2, the old weather wood from AK Interactive, and I'm going to use it as the base coat like a freshly cut wood sort of thing, and I'm going to be using this one, which is a grey, so a light grey wood effect, brown effect. This is what I'm going to be using, and over the top of that I'm going to be putting the wood grain and the weathered wood. So with this product being water based, obviously I've thinned it with water and I've loaded up the brush, but what I've just done there, as you saw on the wet palette, I've slightly dragged front to back with the brush, just testing on that surface just to make sure what it's going to look like. And I don't want to put too much of the product on the brush whatsoever, and I'm just slightly taking a bit more off, and then when I transfer it over to the tool, I want to recreate that sort of line of that wood grain as I go front to back. And because the tool is very small in 1/35, the actual grain is going to be tiny. But either way, I don't need to overemphasize this, so I'll see you in a bit. And the final step for me anyway for painting the wood is to put the weathered wood AK Interactive stuff that I mentioned earlier, and I'm putting this on as a glaze. Now a glaze is just a super thin mix of the painter thinners, in my case the water, and I'm just putting it on at a layer at a time, just making sure that I'm just not overcoating it and taking away what I put on previously. Now you can do whatever you want. You can use whatever steps you want. It is like painting skin on figures, so there's a myriad of different ways and forms of painting the wood. And after painting those wood effects on the other tools, I moved back to the others that I painted the previous Vallejo grey, which kind of resembles RLM 66. And I thinned that with other greys and whites and just went over the top to give it some tonal variation. Also, you can paint sort of edges, as you can see there. Now, obviously, you can use an airbrush if you so wish, but to be honest with you, using the Vallejos thin with water, I find that you have a lot more control, as you can see there, and I can re-energise the paint with the water quite considerably time afterwards, and I can just push and manoeuvre everything like that into place, so that's not too bad. And while I was trying to find a colour to represent the red primer base that I used prior in this build, I thought, you know what, why don't I try the Attacker? So the Attacker is a lacquer based, it's the orange line, and I didn't realise that it was this good at brush painting. Now, admittedly, yes, it'll be for something as small as this. You can't brush a whole kit, to be honest with you, with it, because, yeah, I've tried it on something else after doing this, and yeah, you can't really do too much. But either way, I'm painting all the frames all the way around, because I'm only assuming that, well, back in the factory, they're going to be just painting the outside. They're not going to be worrying about that. All the hatches are going to be closed. So I painted the front, and also what I did is paint all the ones at the back as well. So that was all done using the Attacker. So once the mud is dry, I can do a mix of dark earth and deck tan, and also mixed with leveling thinner. Yes, it does go together all very nicely, not a problem. Now, also, I must admit, I gave the mud at least 24 hours to go off, and I can spray over the top. So what I'm doing is I'm spraying highlights, I'm spraying edges, as you can see there, over the top of mud and this, that and the other. You can go over the top with this stage, so go sparingly, don't overdo it. But if you do, you can come in with the original Dunkelgelb, go over the back, over the top, and then come back in with this colour. So don't get too worried about that. Now, when it comes to metalwork, I haven't got too many products, but what I do have is this True Metal stuff from AK Interactive, and it is a brushable stuff, and it's burnishing and this, that and the other, but it can be removed very easily. But to be honest with you, in this breech area, I'm not going to be touching it, so I can put it into there. And to be honest with you, yes, I know there might be better products to use, but this is what I've got. And as you can see, it doesn't look too bad. It's a bit furry in there, but I think that's because of the base coat colour anyway. And I've done it on the back part of the breech. Now, the next thing to do is to use this Vallejo Model Air steel. And I'm using it as like a chipping agent for the edges of around the breech, on the gun. And I'm doing it very sparingly. Only reason being is because I'm only assuming that there won't be that much chipping on this vehicle. Like I said, and I have always said, and you're probably going to get bored of me saying this, is that this vehicle probably wouldn't have operated for too long to get overly weathered. And as you can see, I'm just doing it all the way around the breech. Now, I'm only assuming that there's going to be a lot of operation to get rounds in there, and it's going to get chipped quite a lot. And I'm doing a lot more further, just a bit round. I've seen a lot of images where this is the case, so again, make sure you check your references for this part. And as you can see, in the breech, it doesn't look too bad, and on the sliding mechanisms and this, that and the other, so not too bad there. So another technique that you can use is dry brushing. I'm using XF19 and I'm using it on the MG42. Now, I could have used silver, but that's way too stark. I could use something a lot darker, but to be honest with you, you wouldn't see it. So I opted for the XF19. I tried it on another machine gun that I had in stash that was already painted black, and I thought it looked quite good actually, it don't look too bad. Now you might think I might go over the top, but this could have come off somewhere else. And then this moves us on to rubber tyres. I hate them. But in a way, I use Attackers because, yeah, I had to do a lot of testing, to be honest with you, because nothing seemed to be sticking. So I used Tamiya, I used Mr. Hobby, I used AK Real Colours. I used pretty much everything in the stash without exception of Attacker. Now, I got this idea from Lenny at RTBModels because he says you need to dry brush them like sort of a grey colour. Now, you can use any grey colours you wish. I've not shown you which grey colour I've used because you can use anything. Now, when I told Lenny I'm using this on rubber tyres, we both went, ah, right. Now, this is only because Gary at Tiger Hobbies had given me the brief that I can only use what's inside the box. So I'm kind of stuck to using the rubber tyres. Now, in hindsight, what I've done is I've basically dry brushed it there, but then I came to the conclusion as I was dry brushing, I was taking the original paint off. So what I've done and what I've moved on to is a wet dry brush. I've never done this before, but it kind of worked. In hindsight, what I should have really done is sanded the surface of the tyre and then go over the top with the Attacker. I think it should have been a lot better. So most of you would have seen my builds by now, and this is the product that I like using, the light dust effects from AK Interactive. And I've put it on this one tyre, but I've put it on literally all the rest of the others. And I'm just slapping it on. I'm not using any white spirit whatsoever. So I'm going to see you in a bit. Once I'd applied the light dust effects, then I started taking it off with some white spirit, just general normal white spirit for me. And I'm taking off whatever I don't want and leaving whatever I do. And to be honest with you, this is the point when I suddenly realised, hang on a minute, it's taking it all off. Yeah, that's right, it's rubber tyres. Oh. Right, okay. So I'm going to go gingerly. I'm going to put a product over the top and try and seal it in later. And the other thing that I didn't want to happen was the product to go in between the tread, but I've got no option. I just had to do that. And the other thing that I forgot to mention was that I actually glued the steering in position so that it won't move. I personally think that it's a bit of a gimmick, so I did that. So it's not a toy, and obviously I'm putting that wheel on there. And this is the point where I felt that I can put a wash on here, so I'm using Abtai Long Shadow Brown. I later use it on the upper and lower parts of the hull. And yeah, to be honest with you, I find that this is the best all-rounder for me for any particular colour. And then I move on to actually spraying and trying to lock in that light dust effects that I mentioned earlier. Now I'm using Tamiya Buff mixed with some white and this, that and the other. And I'm just spraying around the hub on the tyre, and I spray streaks and this, that and the other. So yeah, I tried to lock it in, to be honest with you. I left it 24 hours, both products, just to go off, but it was still coming off. So if you can just not touch the tyres, that's probably the best option. So, as I previously mentioned, I'm putting the Abtai Long Shadow Brown onto the lower part of the hull. Later, I'll put it onto the upper parts and this, that and the other. And I'm picking all out the nuts and crannies, the mud, and this, that and the other. So you can see the mud there. It picks it out very nicely. Now, one thing I got to mention, and I don't need to overemphasise putting a wash on here, is that there's probably thousands of years worth of footage if you had it all together about putting washers on. Now, what I do is, my head is about, I'd say in scale terms, 20 feet away from the model. So if it looks still too stark, then I need to go in there with the white spirit and take a little bit more off. And then if I put it under a camera, which you can see here, if it looks about right, then it is, and I'll leave it as is. Next thing to do is to glue all the parts on here. Now I'm showing this only one door that I'm putting on here because it was a bit of a nightmare to go in. I did need to like sort of trim down the pegs for it to go in, but eventually when it did, and I super glued it in, to be honest with you, it went home. So next up, I'm doing some brush painting with the Vallejo white top, and I'm using this dark blue grey, which is resembling RLM 66, I suppose. It's sort of right around about the right colour, and I am just picking all the details out, going thin, and just building it up as I go along. And to be honest with you, I am going to be doing a lot of spraying afterwards, just doing some weathering with the airbrush, which you're going to see about now. And I am using here the Accurus range. It's the Mr. Hobby H416, I believe, with some Tamiya white mixed into there, XF2 and leveling thinner. Got it quite thin. I don't want too much overspray onto the Dunkelgelb straps. And to be honest with you, I go in there quite heavily because I'm only assuming that these jerry cans could have been nicked from somewhere else and put onto the vehicle. So I want them more weathered than the actual vehicle itself. Next up is to paint the brass shells. I used the base coat XF2 and Extreme Metals AK Interactive Brass, and to be honest with you, the white was way too light, so I cleaned them all back with leveling thinner, cleaned all the paint off, and then used the base coat of black, then the Extreme Metal over the top. This caused me more issues than anything else in the build. To get that brass effect was a nightmare. But when I painted the brass on there, and I must admit all the shells, there was some with the complete head on there with the round, I took them off and drilled them out. Then what I needed to do was to paint over the top certain areas on the base, as you can see there, and on the head, so it looks like they've been fired with black. And then when it's all done, I've got a load of shells that look like that. And I must admit, after doing them, I lost one of them. I don't know where it went. And then when it's all done, I can put the jerry cans on there. I'm just super gluing them into position, as you can see there, and look very nice on the vehicle. Now at this stage, we all know as modelers that the final fit up takes a hell of a long time. And yeah, I don't know why that is. I don't know whether we're trying to get in our own head what we want to achieve. And especially for me in this case, I'm just trying to think, well, where would the shells go? If there's people in the fighting cabin, there's one guy that's ramming shells into the breech and then taking the empty cases out, and he's just throwing them over the side, and they're going to land on the vehicle, the floor, what have you. So yeah, I'm just trying to give at least some dimension to the vehicle and actually use these shells up. So again, I'm going to leave you with me doing this, and I'll see you on the other side. And again, this leads me on to another moment that I wanted to share. These are the parts when you start putting onto your vehicle especially, and you start thinking, ooh, it's coming close to being finished. Now, I've got a clear idea, clear vision in my own head what I want to do with the vehicle when it's finished. Diorama base in a ditch sort of thing, so I'm putting the barrel that way. The other part that I need to put on is the radio antenna. I've painted the top half RLM 66, the bottom half is going to be painted black, because I think it's like a rubbery material. So I'm using Vallejo black, the white top black, as I've used loads of times before, and I'm just painting all the way around. And eventually when I finish that, I come in with the original light dust effects with the AK interactive stuff, just to weather it down. Then I can move on to the mirror, which is the rear view mirror, and I'm using this chrome effect pen, liquid chrome. To be honest with you, I think mine had gone off because, yeah, it wasn't going in there very well. To be honest with you, I don't think this liquid chrome stuff doesn't like paint. It likes pure plastic. So if you can just put it on there, I think it'd be more of a mirror effect. And then using the same product that I've talked about loads of times before, that light dust effects will make interactive on there, and the same on the number plate. Now, I'm not going to talk about me putting a number plate on. It was flat surface, no detail behind it. It was quite straightforward. Now, the dust effects has gone on there. I'm using an airbrush just to dry it back. As you saw there, it dried back very quickly. And then I'm using white spirit over the top, just in a dragging motion from top to bottom. You can do side to side if you wanted to. Dried it back again. And then each subsequent reapplication of white spirit, I'm just taking more off and then just weathering that number plate into the rest of the vehicle, because I'm only assuming they're not going to be like the rest of us going, ooh, my number plate's dirty, I need to clean it. No, they won't be doing that. So again, I'm just drying it down with the airbrush again, and I'm thinking, yeah, is it around about there? And you can do whatever you want to. Well, and there we have it. That is the end of part 5 and the end of the build. And literally we have come full circle, as you would have seen this same footage on part 1, or at least the beginning of part 1 anyway. Now, we are our own worst critics, and to be honest with you, I could have done a little bit more. I could have changed a few bits and bobs on the vehicle as I was going through, but I was learning myself, to be honest with you. And yes, I know there's a lot of better armour models out there, especially on YouTube, but I try my best. Now, the main thing for me anyway is if you get at least something from these builds, then that is one of the main things and the effort that I'm trying to do. So I just want to say thank you so much at the bottom of my heart for watching these videos, and I'll see you on the next one.